بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه. نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. إنه من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد. Okay. So, to try and to recap what the last sort of lesson we did. We were covering the situation. We began with the situation in the Arabian Peninsula just after Khaybar, the Khaybar campaign. So the Muslim power was increasing day by day. Quraysh was decreasing. The strength was decreasing day by day at the same time. The Muslims had eliminated the biggest threats, the biggest dangers to them, and they'd even signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah with Quraysh that secured that side of the southern side of Medina, and they'd also conquered Khaybar, that eliminated the Jewish threat, and even the threats of the Arab tribes. And even the threats from the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire had amassed a big army, and they didn't announce it. So the Arab tribes in the north of the Arabian Peninsula been hostile to the Muslims. So the Prophet sent an army, a big army of 3,000, to secure that area, the northern Arabian Peninsula. And they were surprised when they found a massive army, 100,000 Romans and 100,000 of the Arab allies, so third combined force of 200,000. And what followed was the Battle of Mu'tah, and there was the epic battle, 3,000 versus 200,000. And the Prophet had probably known what was going to happen, and he appointed 3 leaders. And it said, if this leader fights, and if he dies, the next leader will take over after him, and he dies, the next one after him. And after the 3 leaders died in that battle, it happened. It's now the battle area was in the country of Jordan today. After the 3 leaders had died in battle, the 4th one was elected. The 4th one was Khalid bin Walid, who had only recently converted to Islam, and he had never gone into battle against such a huge army. He had proven his brilliance in warfare. But this was his first real test against a massive army, superpower. And the battle lasted several days, and Khalid bin Walid put together a plan to end the battle, in which he tricked the Romans by rearranging the army. So the left flank was swapped with the right flank, the rear guard with the front guard, he swapped them around. And he sent the cavalry behind the hills to try and make a lot of dust in the air, to make it look like the Muslims were receiving reinforcements. And the Romans had been in battle with the Muslim army for several days, and they still hadn't beaten them. Thinking the Muslims are now getting new reinforcements, or madad, what do you call them in Urdu? So they decided that the battle ended. So at the same time Khalid did all that, he also gradually withdrew the Muslim army, slowly, bit by bit, into the desert. So the desert was nearby the battle area. And this was intentional, to make the Romans think that the Muslims were trying to draw the Roman army into a trap, draw them into the desert. So the Roman army did not pursue the Muslim army, other than the Muslim army was retreating bit by bit. And the battle ended, the Muslim army returned back to Medina. And this battle, in addition to some other events, gave had an impression on the Arab tribes. The Arabs started to think, if the Muslims now were able to go into battle against the Romans, the powerful, the mighty Romans, what chance did the Arabs have to go against the Muslims? Another event that made the Arabs think that the same thing is that Abu Sufyan, when he was led a caravan and he arrived in Palestine, he met with the Roman Emperor Heraclius. He had a conversation with him, and the Emperor said, one day these Muslims would come and rule this land. The impression it left on Abu Sufyan, Abu Sufyan was the leader of Mecca. He said, and on record, he said that even the king of the Romans, the emperor of the Romans, is afraid of the Muslims. This and as well as the Battle of Mu'tah made the Arabs think that the Muslims are too powerful. After I also mentioned, we'll cover the Umrah of Qada, Umrah al-Qada. So this was the Umrah that had been agreed to between the Muslims and Quraysh. The Prophet had a dream. He was going to do Umrah, so he went out with 2,000 Muslims to do Umrah with the purpose of doing Umrah, and they were stopped just outside of Mecca by the Quraysh. Quraysh had sent out an army to prevent the Muslims from entering Mecca, even though the Muslims had every legal right to enter Mecca and to perform Umrah. What followed after that, there were negotiations between the two sides, Quraysh and the Muslims, and they reached a treaty, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And as part of the treaty, the Muslims agreed to not continue Umrah that year, but to come back the following year, and they would be permitted to enter Mecca to perform Umrah. So the following year, the Muslims came. The Prophet and the Muslims arrived in Mecca, at Mecca. They performed the Umrah, and at the same time, the people of Mecca evacuated the city to give way to the Muslims to perform the Umrah. It's 2,000 people. It's a lot of people. The Prophet deliberately displayed strength while they were performing Umrah. The Prophet ordered the Muslims to walk quickly around the Kaaba, the Harwala. He ordered the Muslim men to uncover their right arms, the muscular arms, to show power, strength to the Quraysh, who thinking that the Muslims were weak because there had been a rumor that the Muslims had been ill. There was a sickness amongst the Muslims, and they were weak. The Prophet also, in addition to, after performing Umrah, he got married to Seerah Maymuna radiallahu anha, to show the Quraysh that he was completely at home, because he was from Mecca anyway. He was usually from Mecca, but he was was able to live a normal life in Mecca in front of Quraysh. We were evacuated the city and now watching the Muslims from outside the city. And also covered 3 important conversions of Khalid ibn Walid, Amr ibn al-As, and Uthman ibn Talha. They all had different stories, but very interesting ones. But Khalid ibn Walid had been already thinking about converting to Islam when during the time of the Umrah, the Prophet and the Muslims were performing Umrah. After the Muslims had left, he went back to his house and found that his brother, who was already a Muslim, had left him a letter. He read the letter, saying, his brother is telling him, "Why haven't you converted? You're more smarter than that. Use your brain." And the Prophet was asking about you. And that was a tipping point. He decided to convert to Islam. Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As, in order he also saw that the writing on the wall, he saw that the Muslims would probably most likely be victorious. He didn't like that, so he decided to run away from Mecca. He went all the way to Abyssinia. He preferred to live elsewhere rather than to be under Muslim rule. In Abyssinia, because he had a personal friendship with the king of Abyssinia, and the king of Abyssinia was a Muslim, already converted. The king of Abyssinia made da'wah to Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As, and Sayyidina Amr accepted and decided to become Muslim, and he returned all the way back to Mecca, and he met up with Khalid ibn Walid and Uthman ibn Talha when they were traveling to Medina to convert to Islam. Uthman ibn Talha was also a very important person. He came from the tribe of Bani Abd al-Dar, who had been, his job was to keep the keys to the Kaaba the door of the Kaaba, to keep it safe, to preserve, to keep it with them. So it's a huge honor. All three men traveled to Medina and converted to Islam. And I brought that, yes, that's from the movie, The Message. Shows Khalid ibn Walid and Amr ibn al-As entering Medina on the way to meet the Prophet to convert. It's just a slight inaccuracy in the movie. There were three men, not two. And that was the battle of, the map showing the battle of Mu'tah, how far away it was. So 997 kilometers from Medina, in traveling in the hot desert, in summer. And this is some pictures from the battlefield of Mu'tah in Jordan. So on to the next new lesson. Okay, so we're nearly at the conquest of Mecca. We're approaching the conquest of Mecca. There's just one last battle left, one last threat to the Muslims. The Prophet sent out an army under the leadership of Amr ibn al-As. He was a recent convert, so his knowledge of Islam wasn't as complete or as much as the majority of the Sahaba. The Prophet organized an army of 300, and in that army included the highest ranking of the Sahaba, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiallahu anhum. And they traveled to certain tribes, some other Arab tribes who had also, in the northern Arabian Peninsula, who were causing trouble. And Sayyidina Umar was actually related to, was descendant of one, his grandmother was from amongst one of those tribes. The Prophet deliberately selected him, not just because he was descendant of them, but because he was a genius at warfare, just like Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid. So the army traveled at night only. So during the daytime they didn't travel. At night time, to disguise their movements from the enemy. At the same time, while they were traveling, Sayyidina Umar prohibited anybody from lighting a fire at night. Yeah, and the Muslims needed fire because it was very cold. And he said, anybody who lights a fire, I will throw him into that fire myself. He prohibited anybody from lighting a fire. Again, to give away their movements to the enemy. Also, during this campaign of Seerah Lesson, Sayyidina Amr insisted on leading the prayer. So he was leading the prayer with some of the high-ranking Sahaba behind him. But because he was nominated by the Prophet to lead the army, he insisted on leading the prayer. And there was a bit of a sort of, not an argument, but some disagreement. So when the army of 300 arrived at the location, Sayyidina Amr realized he didn't have enough men, so he sent a message back to Medina to the Prophet to ask for reinforcements. So the Prophet sent another 200 men under the leadership of Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah. And when they arrived, Abu Ubaidah was going to lead the prayers, I think it was Dhuhr prayer. And Sayyidina Amr said, no, I am the leader of this army, I should lead it. And in the end, they all, reluctantly initially, but they all accepted his leadership as the Emir, the leader of the army. Now, one other thing that happened during this campaign was that one morning, before Fajr prayer, Sayyidina Amr woke up and he was in a state of impurity. He needed to take a proper shower, a bath to cleanse himself. But he didn't. So instead of doing that, he just performed tayammum and led the prayer. And the other Sahaba knew that he needed to take a proper bath. So they prayed behind him, but when they returned back to Medina, the complaints then to the Prophet. He was insisted on leading the prayer. He wouldn't allow us to light a fire in the middle of the desert in the cold, in the cold. And he led the prayer without performing a proper ghusl. So the Prophet asked him about each of these things, and Sayyidina Amr said, he explained himself, I didn't want him to light the fires because, I didn't want to give away our movements to the enemy. I led the prayer, even Ani Tayammum. He said, because he read in the Quran, do not be the cause of your own death, do not kill yourself. So he was afraid in the cold morning that if he was to perform wudu with cold water, it might make him sick and eventually might kill himself. So he only performed tayammum. The Prophet accepted that. He laughed. He loved the brilliance, the genius of Sayyidina Amr, and accepted what he said. And he said he did the right thing. So Sayyidina Amr was a genius in warfare, and after this campaign, it was another successful campaign. The Prophet would later send him as an ambassador, as to make dawah to the kingdom of Oman in the southeast Arabian Peninsula. He was able to perform his dawah, and the king of Oman accepted Islam, and after the king, the whole kingdom accepted Islam. Other places, such as he led the Muslim armies into victories in Palestine, but also, and most notably, it was Egypt. He led the Muslim army and was responsible for conquering Egypt. So he has a lot of good deeds, hasanat, behind him, because all the millions of people that have been born and raised as Muslims after that, it's been because he led the Muslim army into Egypt and to other places, and he brought Islam to these other places. So now we finally reached the beginnings of the conquest of Mecca. So as I mentioned before, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, between the Muslims and Quraysh. One of the terms of the treaty was that it wasn't really a treaty, it was more like a truce. In Arabic it's called the Truce of Hudaybiyah. In English they correctly translated as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. It was more of a truce, and there are certain agreements, and the Quraysh accepted the Muslims as a legitimate nation. One of the terms of the treaty is that anybody could ally themselves with any side. So anybody, if they wanted to ally themselves with the Muslims, any tribes, they were free to do so. Or if they wanted to ally themselves with Quraysh, they were free to do so. So, two of these tribes were Bani Bakr and Bani Khuza'a. Bani Bakr allied themselves through the treaty to Quraysh, and Bani Khuza'a to the Muslims. And now, Bani Bakr and Bani Khuza'a were both non-Muslim tribes. The Bani Khuza'a were not Muslims. There might have been one or two converts, but the majority of them were not Muslims. Bani Bakr also were not Muslims. They allied themselves to Quraysh, despite the fact that they had a bad history with Quraysh. So, when the Quraysh army, a few years prior, marched out of Mecca to go to fight the Muslims at Badr, Iblis appeared as the form of the leader of one of these elders of Bani Bakr, and said to Quraysh, do not fear Bani Bakr, we're not going to attack you. So there had been a bad history of warfare, of some hostility between Bani Bakr and Quraysh. But despite that, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Bani Bakr allied themselves to Quraysh and Bani Khuza'a to the Muslims. At the same time, Bani Bakr and Bani Khuza'a had a bad history between each other, where they were fighting, killing each other. There had been a feud between the two tribes, which led to people dying and killing and dying and all that. Anyway, after the treaty, in the middle of the night, Bani Bakr, people from Bani Bakr decided to attack people from Bani Khuza'a. In the middle of the night, they had raided them and killed a number of people from Bani Khuza'a. Not only that, Bani Khuza'a, many of them ran away and went to Mecca. This raid happened near Mecca. Bani Khuza'a, people from Bani Khuza'a went into Mecca all the way to the Kaaba. They were pursued by Bani Bakr. And Bakr, even in Mecca, at the Kaaba itself, they were being killed and slaughtered. And Quraysh knew about it. Not only did they turn a blind eye, they helped Bani Bakr to slaughter people of Bani Khuza'a. This happened in Mecca at the Kaaba, even at the Kaaba itself. Now, not all of Bani Bakr and Bani Khuza'a were killed. Some people survived, and including one man named Budayl ibn Warqa al-Khuza'i. Budayl ibn Warqa al-Khuza'i had been, during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, just before the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, there had been some negotiations. He had been one of Quraysh's ambassadors, one of Quraysh's representatives, negotiating with the Muslims. Bani Khuza'a also had a good relationship with the tribe of the Prophet, Bani Hashim. Now, this person, Budayl ibn Warqa al-Khuza'i, also had a personal friendship with Abu Sufyan, the leader of Mecca, at the same time. So after this slaughter of Bani Bakr, Surah of Bani Khuza'a, by Bani Bakr, so Budayl ibn Warqa al-Khuza'i, instead of going to approaching Abu Sufyan and seeking his help, he traveled from Mecca all the way to Medina, to the Prophet, to seek justice. And some of the other persons also from Bani Khuza'a went with him to seek justice. Even though it happened inside Mecca, and Quraysh were legally obliged to have defended them and to gotten justice for them. They didn't approach anybody from Quraysh. They went all the way to Medina to speak to the Prophet. So, it's another silly thing from the movie. This is the movie, according to the movie, the message, there were a group of Muslims somewhere in Oasis, and they were attacked by these raiders, unknown people. They were killed. One or two persons survived. There's no context at all. Which tribe, who these people were, and we know from the historical evidence is that the people who were killed were not Muslims, and the killing not only did happen in an oasis, it happened in Mecca itself, just in front of the Kaaba itself. So this was the pretext. This was what the Muslims needed to be able to organize themselves and to march onto Mecca. The Prophet saw this as an opportunity. What had happened had been a disaster, had been unfortunate. The Muslims had every legal right now to get revenge, to punish Quraysh. Quraysh had not only the ally had attacked an ally of the Muslims, Quraysh had even permitted it to happen. Quraysh had even allowed, not only permitted, but they even helped it to happen. So they had broken the treaty. So now Quraysh, the following day, they met and had an emergency meeting. And they decided that Abu Sufyan would travel from Mecca to Medina to personally ask the Prophet for forgiveness, to ask the Prophet to try and not turn a blind eye, but to forgive them and to keep the treaty going, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the truce. He travels all the way to Medina, Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan arrives in Medina, and first he goes to the house of the Prophet, where his daughter, Abu Sufyan's daughter, Habiba, lived. So Habiba radiallahu anha was the wife of the Prophet and the daughter of Abu Sufyan. He goes inside the house and he goes to sit down on a cushion that the Prophet used to love sitting on. And as soon as Habiba sees that, she tells her father not to sit on that same cushion that the Prophet sat on it. She said to him, to her own father, you are a mushrik, you are a non-Muslim, unbeliever, you are unclean. I don't want you to sit on that. I mean, this normally it would be a harsh thing for a daughter to say to her father. But in this situation, it was the right thing because she was showing Muslim unity. And also because her father was not any ordinary person. Her father was the leader of Quraysh. And her husband was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She couldn't just allow her father to just come in and just sit there. So she had to show that the Muslims are united behind the Prophet. Abu Sufyan was shocked when he left the house. He left and went to meet with the Prophet, to speak with the Prophet, to see if the Prophet will forgive what happened, the transgression of that massacre. The Prophet, instead of speaking to him, he didn't reply, didn't talk to him at all, which was unusual for the Prophet. He simply just gave him the silent treatment. Abu Sufyan leaves the Prophet and goes to meet with Sayyidina Abu Bakr. He was asked Abu Bakr to try and intercede, to try and speak to the Prophet, to get the Prophet to either speak to him or to try and to agree to continue the truce. Then Abu Bakr refused. So Abu Bakr goes to meet Sayyidina Umar to ask him the same thing. Sayyidina Umar said, even if I had an army of ants, or if all I had was an army of ants, I'll still go to war against you. Meaning, I'm not going to help you. So Abu Sufyan leaves Umar, Sayyidina Umar goes to meet Sayyidina Ali. He asks him to do the same thing, try and intercede, to talk to the Prophet. Sayyidina Ali also refuses, rejects the offer, the proposal. But this time Abu Sufyan is desperate. He can't find anybody to try and speak to the Prophet. So he speaks to Sayyidina Ali's wife and Sayyidah Fatima, because he saw their son, Hassan, who was just a little boy. He says, please, will you allow your son to go speak to his grandfather? So Sayyidah Fatima also says, no, I rejected that. So Abu Sufyan was getting desperate. He was looking even for a child to try and help him to speak to the Prophet, intercede on his behalf. Nobody would help him. He even goes outside in the street and tries to speak to anybody, but everybody refuses to help him. So he returns back to Mecca. Now, the Prophet had to take action now, because number one, this was an attack on an ally of the Muslims, is an attack on the Muslims themselves. This is an attack on the dignity of the Muslim nation. So he had to protect that and to defend it. That's number one. Number two, if the Prophet turned a blind eye and forgave them, what's to stop other Arab tribes from doing the same thing again in future? Attack the Muslims again, or allies of the Muslims. The Prophet sees this also as an opportunity now, that this finally he's able to raise an army and march onto Mecca, and maybe perhaps conquer Mecca. So he sends out instructions to all the Arab tribes to send warriors, armed men, to go to gather and form an army. But he doesn't tell them to come to Medina. He instructs them to travel directly to a place called Mar al-Dhahran. Mar al-Dhahran, which is about 22 kilometers outside of Mecca. So he didn't want to travel with an army of 10,000 all the way from Medina to Mecca. So bit by bit, pieces of the army would converge on one area, and then they'd have a big army just outside of Mecca. The Prophet was able to muster an army of 10,000, and this was deliberate. He wanted to use overwhelming force. He wanted to avoid any bloodshed as much as possible, because his intention now was to conquer Mecca. He wanted to avoid any bloodshed. Mecca is one of the Haramain, it's a holy place. He wanted to avoid bloodshed as much as possible. And also, of course, of an army of 10,000, when the people of Quraysh would see that, the intention was also psychological. For them to see such a huge army, the hope was that they would just give up. They would realize that they had no chance of fighting against this massive army. The army arrives just outside of Mecca, and all 10,000, and at night the Prophet orders the Muslims in the army to light up campfires by the hundreds, maybe even thousands. Again, deliberately, at night, so the people of Mecca would look up and see hundreds of campfires all just almost surrounding the city. Again, psychological, to make them realize how big the army was, and that there was no point in resisting it. Okay.
What was the photo?
The photo? This one? So this is, yes, another scene from the movie another silly inaccuracy. So that's supposed to be Abu Sufyan in the middle, and that's supposed to be, according to the movie, Khalid bin Walid. He didn't meet Khalid bin Walid. Went to his house. Abu Sufyan went to the house of his daughter Habiba. His daughter told him not to sit on the same cushion as the Prophet. He then went to meet the Prophet. The Prophet did not speak to him. He went to meet Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr refused to help him, to intercede on his behalf. He went to meet Sayyidina Umar, same thing, refused to help him. He went to meet Sayyidina Ali, several people, not Khalid bin Walid. And Sayyidina Ali refused to help him. Even he tried to get Sayyidina Ali's own son, Hassan, to help him speak to the Prophet. Again, that was all rejected. And then according to the movie, he met with Khalid bin Walid. Khalid bin Walid told him, give up. It's your fault, you did all that.
Another scene in the movie that he comes and talks to the Prophet and the Prophet turns away from him and chasing him around.
Yeah.
He never met the Prophet in real life.
He met the Prophet. The Prophet refused to speak to him. Yeah, like in the movie. That part is correct. Yeah. This is a little thing. So this is one small thing. So when the Muslims arrived at Marad Dhahran, this was during Ramadan, and I think the fasting was difficult on the Muslims. They've been traveling a long distance. They were fasting because of Ramadan. The Prophet ordered the Muslims to break their fast just after Asr prayer. And the majority of the Muslims obeyed him. They broke their fast early, before Maghrib prayer. But a small group of people did not obey, and they continued fasting. And the Prophet was angry. Said that they should have obeyed him. So there are certain situations, basically, especially even during the month of Ramadan, where it's permissible to break your fast if the situation calls for it, and to not put yourself under extreme hardship. So the majority of the army, they were suffering, they were fasting, and they'd been traveling, and the fasting was very difficult on them. They'd been not feeling very strong. And the Prophet probably needed the army to be strong, to be able to march into Mecca well fed and strong and energetic. Another silly inaccuracy in the movie. So Abu Sufyan goes to the Muslim camp at night, and he meets up with Sidna Bilal, and Bilal takes the Prophet, takes Abu Sufyan to meet with the Prophet, and then Abu Sufyan converts. Abu Sufyan actually met Sidna Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, not Sidna Bilal. It was Abbas who took him to meet with the Prophet, and at the same time, Abu Sufyan, again, he's in the midst of the army. He's seeing the thousands of people there. Again, he's just reinforcing the impression in his mind that this army is too powerful. You cannot resist them. This was all intentional by the Prophet. He wanted the Quraysh people of Mecca to surrender without a fight. The Abu Sufyan meets with the Prophet, and this time the Prophet begins to talk to him. Abu Sufyan converts to Islam, and the Prophet then announces his famous made an announcement. He said, anybody, because the intention, everybody knew that the Muslims would enter Mecca the next day. The Prophet said, anybody who takes refuge inside Abu Sufyan's house, he is safe. And then after that, he mentioned, because not everybody in Mecca, he knew that not everybody in Mecca would be able to fit into Abu Sufyan's house. He said anybody inside their own house will be safe. That in other words, they will not be attacked, they will not be killed. And the very next day, the Muslim army marches into Mecca. And Surah Al-Nasr, إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا سبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. Now, the Nasr, إذا جاء نصر الله, the victory is the victory of the conquest of Mecca. Now, the Prophet, when he entered Mecca, he was riding on his camel, and he, in contrast to many other world leaders, he was actually trying to be humble. I think he was lowering his head, almost as if he was making ruku'ah. He was trying to be humble, not to show that he was not arrogant, that he's not in direct contrast to kings and conquerors, bowing his head. And in the surah it says, istighfar, ask for forgiveness. Now the forgiveness here is a reminder from Allah that the victory is from Allah. So if anybody thinks is victorious, a Muslim, and thinks that the victory is because of him, as his own abilities, the victory is not from him, it's from Allah. The Muslim needs to remember that the victory is from Allah. And in another surah in the Quran, where back in ancient times in Egypt, the Quran talks about Qarun, a man from the tribe of Bani Israel. He was so wealthy. He said, this was during the time of Sayyidina Musa. Qarun, in the Quran, he says, Qarun says that all this massive wealth is because of me, because of what I did. I mean, in fact, it's Allah who gave him all that wealth. He wasn't giving credit to Allah. He was putting all the credit to himself. This is a similar sort of idea. If Allah says, seek forgiveness, if you start to think that all this is because of all the victory or whatever, the success is because of your own efforts and not because of Allah. Of course, it doesn't mean you don't go and work hard. It means you still have to work hard and try to have a plan and to do everything you can. But in the end, the success is from Allah. You can put all the effort you want, but you can still fail to achieve what you want to achieve. But if Allah gives you that success, then yes, it's because of Him. This is a modern picture of Mecca, and the arrows indicate the direction, the Muslim army and how it entered Mecca. So one part of the army entered through here. Another one, this is the prophets, where the prophet was marching, entered through here. Another one through here, and the last one from the south. So 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and Khalid ibn Walid led this one here. And this at the south here, the Quraysh had managed to form a small force to resist the Muslims. The small army consisted mostly of slaves. This was intentional because it was the slaves' duty to fight and die, whereas the rich people they didn't have to fight. But even then, the small force of slaves was led by Sayyidina Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, and Safwan ibn Umayyah. They were from the elites. Inshallah, next time we'll cover the conquest of Mecca in more detail and what happened in Mecca. And that's all I had for tonight. If anybody has any questions, any comments about anything I've covered? No? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.